Warning, we cover 1,000 years in a single video here. When we do that, it is impossible to present a full or a balanced perspective on the time period of the Middle Ages. You may come away from this video feeling like I have presented the Middle Ages entirely negatively, as if there was nothing good about the period. And I want to let you know that that is not the case, that there were many great and good and beautiful things that happened in the Middle Ages. It's just the nature of the time that we have, due to quarantine, to cover this material, that it will seem like I have emphasized the negative. I do not want you to think that the Middle Ages was all bad. It may also seem like I have presented Christianity in the Middle Ages as a largely negative thing. Again, that is not my intention. That is just the nature of how quickly we have to move through this material, that some of those things that may seem negative are what come out more obviously in this video. While I still choose not, because of the teacher-student relationship, to discuss whatever I do or don't believe or practice religiously, I will tell you, so that you can identify my potential biases, where they are and where they aren't, that my own family cultural heritage, like the majority of people in this country, is Christian, and that I do identify as part of the Roman Catholic Church myself. Which I tell you, not, again, I won't get into any specifics of what I do or don't believe, but I tell you that just to offset how it may seem like I am very critical of those things that actually are a part of my own identity. So, having given you this warning, ladies and gentlemen, let us explore 1,000 years. For a more balanced look at the Middle Ages, this video will link to a crash course from John Green about the Middle Ages. You are welcome to go on to watch that, or stay tuned for sophomore year, when most of you will take world history. Brace yourself, gonna blast off any time. Collect yourself. Things will never be the same in your sad, sad world. Amen. Hello and welcome to Humanities class for Monday, May 11th. I'm doing something a little different with this video. I'm actually using Zoom all by myself to record the video. It's going to result in a little lower picture quality, but I'm hoping that makes it easier for me to go back and forth between the visuals that I want to share with you. Okay, so welcome. When we left off before last week, we saw the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Not in any great detail. That's something you looked at in middle school world history, and we'll look at again, most of you next year, in high school level world history. Remember, our main focus is on ideas, not the events. That's why you're not being given 1,000 names and dates and places to memorize. We're doing a bird's eye view of the ideas that precede the actions that have shaped our world. Those of you with good memories will remember that that was one of my two main rules at the beginning, laws at the beginning of this class. Ideas precede actions. Before any human action is done, it is born in a human mind. And we are looking at the ideas that give birth to actions. And we're in the last 3 weeks. So if you didn't already know that, I have grotesquely failed as not only a teacher, but as a human being. So the Western Roman Empire collapses, and it is absolutely catastrophic for the people of Europe. I've compared what that does to the intellectual life of Europe to what a meteor would do if it slams into your house or slams into your face. Meteor slams into your face, I will no longer be the ugliest person in this class. Uh, the mind of Europe for 1,000 years after the fall of Rome was in ruins, just like your home or your face after a meteor slams into it. I've asked you to think about the meteor's coming. You have 4 minutes to put what you can in a bag and leave the house and get to safety. So what do you take? Now, unfortunately, I'm recording this before I have a chance to see any of your answers, but I'm going to make a couple predictions. We'll see how that plays out. I predict that nobody says, I'm not going to pack a bag. Instead, I'm going to go in the kitchen and I'm going to make some ramen. Depending on how fast the water gets boiling, I should have that in under 4 minutes, but I like ramen and I'm going to make some ramen. I don't think anybody's making ramen when the meteor is on its way to destroy your house. I predict that nobody says, I'm not going to put anything in the bag, but I am going to clip my toenails. You know, we've been in quarantine. I haven't had a chance to get a pedicure lately. Or if you're me, I haven't had a chance to get a pedicure yet in 40 years. And I want my toes to look their best. So I'm going to go upstairs and clip my toenails. And 10 toes, 4 minutes, maybe I'll make it. Maybe I'll make it. No. Nobody clips their toenails when the meteor's coming at your house. I may have some people who do say, I'm not putting anything in the bag. Nothing's worth it. I'm not taking any risks. I'm getting out to safety. Those of you who would stop to put a few things in the bag, the things you choose must be super important. All right. You're going to leave behind anything that's not absolutely essential because your life is at risk and you value your life more than you value any of your possessions. So if something does make it into that bag in 4 minutes, it's something that's very important to you. When the empire collapses in the West, with the empire goes all of the social structures that brought stability to the people of Europe. Medical care, education, military, and the ancient version of police, all gone. It is chaos. What do you bring with you when it's chaos? When you no longer have the luxury to ask yourself, what do I want to do with my life and with my time that is going to bring me joy and help me find meaning? Now, after the empire falls, your only question is, how do I stay alive another day, another hour, another 10 minutes? This period after the fall of the Western Empire is what we know as the Middle Ages. Share screen. The Middle Ages are the period after the fall of the Western Roman Empire until the start of the modern era. Now, the Western Empire falls in the year 476, and the modern era, now look, these eras, it's not like somebody woke up one day and said, oh, yesterday was the end of the Middle Ages, today begins the modern era. These are terms that historians use after the fact to classify periods. 1518 is a pretty good date to consider the beginning of the modern era, because by 1518 you have nation states, you have the discovery of America, and you have the Protestant Reformation have all happened or begun. But you know, that's an after the fact historian's term, these eras. At any rate, the beginning, 476, that's concrete. The empire falls in 476. So notice this is a very long period. We are talking about 1,000 years in the history of Europe. Now, when we talk about a couple things to keep in mind, you've heard me say now for 2 weeks the fall of the Western Roman Empire. That's because starting with Emperor Constantine, he's the one who in the year 313 legalized Christianity. Constantine set up a second capital in the empire. Okay, the old capital, of course, of the Roman Empire is Rome. Constantine set up a second base of operations in modern day Turkey, in a town he very humbly named after himself, Constantinople. The western half of the empire falls in 476, but the eastern half of the empire stands for 1,000 years. The Eastern Roman Empire remains a major political force in the world until the year 1453. It finally falls in 1453. It falls to the Ottoman Turks, who take over and establish an Islamic empire known as the Ottoman Empire in the country that is now Turkey. And the ancient city of Constantinople becomes Istanbul. For 1,000 years, the Eastern Roman Empire is the dominant cultural force for Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe is going to go in a different direction than Western Europe. And to this day, there's a very different cultural feel and spirit in Eastern Europe, in places like Bulgaria and Romania and Croatia and even Greece. Greece, which is the cradle of the West, is really tacked on to Eastern Europe for the last 1,000 years. Russia is going to emerge in this time and is going to be heavily influenced by the Eastern Roman Empire, but never become part of it, so that when the Eastern Roman Empire collapses in 1453, Russia steps in and fills that vacuum as the major dominant cultural and political force in Eastern Europe. But today we're looking at Western Europe. The empire collapses in Western Europe, and that begins the period known as the Middle Ages. I want to talk to you, another thing. You're so happy. I keep thinking of more things that make this video longer and longer. Notice that when we use the term Middle Ages, we are taking something that happened in Europe, and we're using it to define a 1,000-year period for the entire world. This is an example of what we've talked about before as Euro. I don't know. Maybe my video froze up. Maybe it didn't. Either way, you can laugh at me. Something we call Eurocentrism, even an example of white privilege, how historians of the past have looked at Europe, white people, Christians, and said, that's what matters. Everybody else sort of comes in second. That's one of the unfortunate things about history, is that it's been around for a while, and much of it is written by people who don't share some of the attitudes that we have today. I don't know how you avoid using some of these Eurocentric terms like the Middle Ages, because look, if you're in Spain or England or France and the Western Roman Empire collapses, that changes everything for you. If you're in China or Japan, it changes nothing for you. You probably barely even hear about the news. If you are a member of the Taino people in Puerto Rico, when the Western Roman Empire falls, man, y'all don't even know each other's halves of the world exist yet, and won't for 1,000 years. And when you do find out, it's going to be really bad news. So it's a little absurd to define the whole world based on this event that impacts just one part of it, at least immediately. But that's the terminology we've inherited. So I'm alerting you to the fact that it's problematic. I'm not advocating a way to single-handedly fix that. Perhaps your generation will be the ones to fix that. All right, let's take a look at some key ideas of the Middle Ages. Everything takes forever. I already regret making this video this way with Zoom, but we're going. Okay. Order and hierarchy are highly valued in the Middle Ages. Think about that. Remember, it's a time of crisis. The empire has collapsed. Look, you're not, let's say your father was a doctor or your neighbor was a doctor and you wanted to be a doctor too, and you were planning to study at the neighborhood doctor's feet and learn medicine. Well, that's no longer an option. Okay. It's the Middle Ages. Society has collapsed. The nearest book that could teach you anything about medicine is 300 miles away, and you can't read anyway. So, so much of the structure and the education and the technology that existed in Rome is now gone, and you're living in chaos. And when we live in chaos, we crave order. Think about this. We're having, let's say we have, I hate that we have to do this, but we have these active shooter drills in school, okay? And I make you get behind the red line. I make all 40 of you pretend that you can fit in a space that can't fit more than 9 people. I make you pretend that the guy won't just shoot through the wall because now he knows where everybody's standing. You all cram back there. Lights are off. You're supposed to be silent. You're not supposed to be playing on your phone, but you know that it's not real, so you're screwing around anyway, okay? Now, heaven forbid it is real, all that chaos is gone. All of a sudden, you're listening for my instructions, you're listening for the police's instructions, and whereas usually me telling you what to do or the police telling you what to do is a pain in the butt, you can't stand it, now there's danger, now there's chaos, and now it's, yes, sir, whatever you say, sir, okay? When there's chaos, order and hierarchy is rank, are very highly valued. There develops in the Middle Ages this idea called the great chain of being. Okay. It's this thought that there is an order to all reality, and that order comes in a hierarchy with God at the top, and then angels underneath God, and humans underneath angels, and animals underneath humans, and plants down to minerals, that everything has a precise place, a precise role to play in reality. And there are, this is something that would really appeal maybe to those type A personalities who are very organized, who are very neat. I am not those people. This is how I live. I thrive. I don't even know if you can see this junk. I thrive in chaos. I live out of piles of junk, and that's okay for me. And I usually find the need to meticulously organize and keep everything in its right place. I can't stand it. There's type A personalities who there's a thing for everything and everything in its place would really probably appreciate this idea of the great chain of being. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a place, from God all the way down to the dirt and everything in between. You fulfill your purpose by knowing your place. What we don't have in the Middle Ages is social mobility. You don't have this idea that, look, I was born poor, I was born a peasant. When I press share screen, you share the screen. You don't, I was born poor, I was born a peasant, but I'm going to work hard and move up. No. Everything has a place, and that place was given to it by God. So if you're a person, which you are, your role in life was assigned to you by God, and it's not gonna change. All right. So there is a hierarchy within humans. All right. At the top is the empty spot where the emperor should be. Of course, the empire's gone. So there's no more emperor in the West. I have here, you can't see it because I'm covering it up, absent or questionable the emperor. What I mean by that is there were different times, and you probably studied this in middle school, and we'll study it again next year, where they tried to establish replacements for the old Roman emperor, especially something called the Holy Roman Empire, which is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. But anyway, the emperor would be at the top if there were an emperor, and so would the Bishop of Rome. That's the leader of the Catholic Church, also known as the Pope. Pope is the English version of the Latin word papa, which means exactly what it sounds like, daddy. Um, those two would be equal figures, and since this one, the emperor, isn't actually there, it is the Pope who's on the top of the social ladder in the Middle Ages. Next, you have kings. It's believed that kings rule by divine right, that God ordains the kings. So, if you're a king and your subjects believe that God has made you king and they don't like what you're doing, that gives you a lot of room, a lot of power to say, too bad, do what I say or else. It allows the government to say, defying us, going against the government, is defying God. And people encouraging other people to rebel against the government are really encouraging them to rebel against God, which means they're really endangering people's souls. The person who rebels against the king is trying to make other people go to hell, the king would say. And so that gives the king a lot of power, a lot of control. Underneath the king, you have the nobility, dukes and duchesses and lords and ladies, and also the clergy. That's the ministers of the church. And the clergy is also arranged in a hierarchy. So the highest ranking officials in the church are the bishops, sort of the chief priests, the head of all the priests. You have the orders of monks and other religious orders. You have the priesthood. Under the priests, you have deacons and those in minor orders. Below that, you have basically the everybody else, the peasants. This is the category into which the vast majority of people fit. You would have studied the feudal system in middle school history, and we'll study it again next year in high school world history. That's why we're not going into any depth about it. But this is where the majority of people are born, live, and die. You can almost never escape this class. Once in a blue moon, a serf, a peasant, a commoner might get ordained a priest and sort of move up that way. Other than that, you're not going from peasant to king unless you happen to raise up an army and overthrow the king. Then under that, you have criminals. And under that, you have what I'm calling outsiders. All right. I want you to think about something for a second. If order and structure is so highly valued in medieval society, how do you think somebody who doesn't fit into the picture is treated? Life is chaotic. You crave order. You need order to survive. God has designed an order, a place for everybody. And this guy over here is doing his own thing. This guy over here is not playing along. This guy over here you would consider as both an enemy of God and as a grave danger to what little stability you have in society. Who fits into those categories? Who are these outsiders? I'm pressing the button. When I press the button, you do the thing. Who are the outsiders? Jews, gender or sexual minorities, people who were the categories of gay, lesbian, transgender were not categories that they used, but the experiences all existed. So gender and sexual minorities, Pagans, at least in the early Middle Ages, the few people that still worship the old gods, witches, whether there were women who actually attempted to practice witchcraft or were just accused, and heretics at the absolute bottom. All right, the scum of the earth in the medieval mind would be heretics, and those are Christians who are the wrong kind of Christian. Christians who believe and teach things other than the official teaching of the church. The existence of all of these groups in the Middle Ages was considered a threat to the safety, security, divine approval of all of society. And people in these groups were brutally persecuted, hunted, tortured, murdered, lots of stuff. So the Middle Ages was not the time to do your own thing and have your own original thoughts or ideas, to break away from the majority. So hierarchy and order are strongly valued. Number two, the church is the primary source of cultural identity and social stability in the Middle Ages. In the last 100 years of the Western Roman Empire, Christianity became the official religion of the empire. And it did not take long, once that happened, it did not take long for the majority of people in the empire to become Christians. And in the West, today's Roman Catholic Church is the official state church of the Roman Empire in the West. When the empire collapses, the church doesn't go with it. And now there is this great absence, now that the emperor is gone and the imperial government is gone, and this one mega state is broken up into much smaller countries, many of them the countries we know today, England, France, Spain. We often think about, if you have studied or thought about the church in the Middle Ages, the church has a ton of power, a ton of authority in society, and a ton of wealth. And it's a time that we often associate with great corruption, where the spiritual role that the church plays in people's lives is used to acquire earthly power to dominate and control people's lives. That's not a false picture, but it's not the full picture. The church didn't take over society by force. The church didn't take over in order to become this grand, corrupt, powerful thing, even though corruption was widespread. The church stepped in because somebody had to. All right. The social structures have collapsed. The emperor is gone. Somebody needs to step in and help. So for all the negatives that come from the power of the church in the Middle Ages, it was at least born in good intentions and born in necessity. I don't have the right to walk into my neighbor's house and tell my neighbor how to raise his kids unless my neighbor is addicted to drugs and not feeding his kids and beating his kids. And then all of a sudden, somebody does have to step in. And I may have to come in and call none of this is true, by the way. My neighbor doesn't do that. But all of a sudden, in an emergency, I'm given authority just because I'm a human being and need to help. And that's where the church's role in the Middle Ages comes from, as much as it may have been abused or corrupted. I want us to meet St. Augustine of Hippo, who lived from 354 to 430. This is the man who, more than any other, puts his imprint on the ideas of the Middle Ages. He dies before the beginning of the Middle Ages. He is the last great ancient philosopher and the first great Christian philosopher. There were other Christian philosophers before him, St. Justin Martyr in the 2nd century is usually considered the first. But St. Justin Martyr wasn't that big a deal as a philosopher. St. Augustine is a great Neoplatonist. That means he stands in the tradition of Plato, a great philosopher who then becomes a Christian, and not only a Christian, but a bishop, and he continues to do both. He leads his church, he preaches and practices Christianity, and he continues to write philosophy as well. His autobiography, The Confessions, is the first great literary autobiography. It's an absolute masterpiece. It is, whether you love or hate Augustine, just the use of language in the Confessions is beautiful. Late have I loved thee, beauty so ancient, so new. Late have I loved thee. It's an absolute masterpiece, and he wrote thousands of pages. It's from Augustine that Christianity gets its emphasis on a concept called original sin. And this is sort of the ultimate blending of Plato with Christianity. Plato, who thinks that that idea and spirit is real, matter is not. Later, Platonists want us to escape the material world. Augustine says we need to escape the material world because the material world is fallen. Due to the sin of the first people created by God in the Bible. He's blending Plato explicitly with Christian ideas. So he says when Adam and Eve sin in the Garden of Eden, the entire material universe falls. And from that day, people are born having inherited the guilt of what Adam and Eve did. So people are born evil and corrupt. People are born deserving eternal damnation. Not everybody who follows Augustine is going to go so far as to say that even babies deserve to go to hell and will go to hell if they're not baptized. Most Christians do not say that, but Augustine did. He said, yeah, babies who die without baptism, they burn in hell forever and ever and ever and ever. And they deserve it because we're born having inherited guilt. Nothing we do can cleanse us of the filth that we're born with. Only the grace of God. Only faith in Jesus Christ and the sacraments of the church can heal us and save us from this misery that we're born into and that we deserve. That was the last voice of the ancient world. Augustine is followed by Proclus of Athens. He is the first. If Augustine was the last great ancient philosopher, Proclus is the first great medieval philosopher. He's also the last important philosopher in Europe until modern times who is not a Christian. Proclus is a pagan. He practices a version of the worship of the old gods of Greece and Rome, and he carries on Plato's tradition. He has that in common with Augustine, even though Proclus is not a Christian. 3 more people to very briefly meet. Dionysius. Dionysius is from Syria. Why are we talking about Syria when we're talking about Western Europe? Because remember, Syria was also part of the empire. It's going to go its own way after the fall of the empire, but this is early in the Middle Ages. So it still has a common heritage with Europe. Dionysius is not his real name. He uses a fake name. He pretends to be a figure from the Bible, from the book of the Acts of the Apostles, but he's actually writing in the late 400s, early 500s, continuing to blend Christianity with Plato's thought. He thinks that we all participate in a hierarchical fashion in the one, which is explicitly God. There's Boethius from Italy, lives from 477 to 524. He writes a very beautiful book called The Consolation of Philosophy, in which he tries to show that reason and the life of the mind is a very important element to living a good and meaningful life. He writes this in prison, waiting to be executed. He will be just about the last voice for the value of reason as a separate and equally valuable thing as faith for centuries. He is primarily a Platonist, but he also is a scholar of Aristotle. He will be the last scholar of Aristotle for centuries. His goal was to translate all of Aristotle's works into Latin so that they could be preserved in Western Europe, but he only got one, Aristotle's book Logic. He only managed to translate one before he died. And so for the next 500, 600, 700 years, all Europe's going to have of Aristotle is one book, his Logic. And just throw out this name, John Scotus Eriugena from Ireland, lived from 815 to 877. This is a time of almost no learning anywhere in the continent, and here comes this masterful Platonist philosopher who tries to tie together all the thinkers that came before him. We won't get in it. We'd have spent like a week on each one of these guys if it weren't for remote learning, but they deserve to have their names heard by you. That's why I told you about them. Next important idea in the Middle Ages is a distrust of human reason. A distrust of human reason. This is very much connected to St. Augustine and to the fact that mankind is believed to be fallen and corrupt, that we can do nothing to save ourselves from the filth and misery and damnation that we deserve because of what sacks of garbage we are. If your sack of garbage, if your actual sack of garbage came to life and started telling you what it thinks about things, you probably wouldn't take that very seriously because it's a sack of garbage. Well, we think human beings are sacks of garbage unless they're redeemed, so there's a distrust of human reason. That's going to have negative impact on science and technology. What's the role of reason in the Middle Ages? St. Anselm of Canterbury, who is a great philosopher. You don't have dozens of great philosophers living at the same time in the Middle Ages like you do the ancient world, but you do have great philosophers. It's just they pop up a century or two apart. Anselm sums up, though, what the Middle Ages thinks about the purpose of our mind, and it's faith-seeking understanding. Our reason exists to help us understand the things we believe by faith because they are taught by the church as having been revealed by God. Our reason does not exist to figure things out for ourselves. Our reason does not exist to, God forbid, say anything contrary to the teaching of the church. That's a one-way ticket to being tied to a stake and lit on fire. The role of reason in the Middle Ages is to help us better understand the things we already accept based on faith. The Middle Ages prioritize spirit over matter. Again, you know whose imprint you see on this whole period? It's Plato, who's been dead for centuries and centuries and centuries. But Plato's idea that spirit is good and matter is less important or even evil, well, now that matter is fallen and needs to be redeemed by God's grace, God who is a spirit. And that also means the church is more important than state, faith more important than reason. If you are living in the Middle Ages and you're one of those rare people with the opportunity to get an education, the ability to read, skills, dreams, and a chance to actually decide what you want to do with your life. And that's not most people. Remember, most people are stuck where they're born, which is digging in the dirt for some lord. But if you're one of the few people with those opportunities, with those privileges, with those skills, you're going to want to use those skills to do the thing that you think is actually important. We talked about this last week when I asked you what you want to do with your life and why. Medieval people were no different. They had passions, they had dreams. They wanted to spend their lives doing something that's important. They live in an age where it is spirit that's important. It is faith, it is church that is important. And sure, those things are still important for many of us living today. But in the Middle Ages, they are all that's important, all that you can rely on. Everything else is a distant second. In a way, it's just not for modern people, even those who are people of faith. The physical world, physical life, secular worldly careers, learning, education, reason are still valued even by people of faith today in a way that they couldn't be in the Middle Ages. You only had 4 minutes to fill your sack. And so the medieval person fills the sack with faith stuff, God stuff, church stuff. And those people with the opportunity to get an education and pursue a career are going to pursue a career in the church for the most part. You'll have some who were lawyers who assist the kings, but most of your educated people are working in the church. Most of your educated people are priests. And then there is also an opportunity the church offers through the religious orders, the orders of nuns, uh, is one of the rare places for women to be educated and exercise leadership in society. So the emphasis is all going to be on faith with a distrust of reason. Science and technology are going to be almost utterly neglected, and outsiders suck. We already saw how the people inside society who were considered outsiders, we didn't go into detail, but at least we did them the honor of naming them and their struggle. Jewish people, gay people, um, uh, pagans while there were still pagans, witches and alleged witches, and heretics were persecuted. People outside the borders of the Western Christian world were considered nothing but a threat. All right. If you have some idea, but you're not part of the Western Christian world, we don't want to hear it. Okay. Outsiders suck. There will be a new group of outsiders developing in the early Middle Ages, outsiders from the perspective of Western Europe. Islam will emerge in the seventh century, and we're going to talk about that next time. And there's going to be a near constant state of warfare between Western Europe and the Islamic world for centuries. You've probably studied the Crusades a little bit in middle school history, and you'll study it again next year in high school history. It's a period of conflict. It's a period of near constant warfare. And what's going to be, well, I suppose obviously the most tragic part of that is that you have people killing each other instead of listening to each other, and killing each other in the name of God. And you've got uh, any account of the Crusades that tries to point to one side or the other and say this was the good guys, this was the bad guys, these were people of peace, these were the violent ones, is wasting your time. Life is more complex than that. And so you have a lot of complicated reasons on both sides, in which neither side is innocent and neither side is just bloodthirsty monsters. You just have people, okay? People who were thrown by circumstances and by ideology into a state of near perpetual conflict for centuries. I started to say something. I don't remember what I started to say. Okay. But here's the other tragedy is, and we'll get into this in the days to come. Some of the ideas that are going to be practiced over in the Islamic world, you're going to have much better science, much better medicine, much better technology, and people of Europe, Western Europe, not taking advantage of any of that because they don't trust, because the outsiders threaten to endanger the order of our society, and that order comes from God. So if we listen to outsiders, even if they're just talking about, here's how you survive the plague, here's how you build a building that won't fall down. If we listen to these outsiders, they're going to endanger our eternal salvation, and we're going to end up in hell where we all actually deserve to be anyway. So we have closed ourselves off to any ideas that don't emerge from our own culture. People still do that today, marching around with tiki torches in their moron hands, chanting for blood and soil, and wanting to keep our culture as undiverse, and to not listen to outsiders and not welcome in outsiders. And following that path, and I won't say too much about this, but following that path would send us right back to the Middle Ages, which is not where we want to be. So that's that's an introduction to ideas in the Middle Ages. Basically, every minute in this video would have been about 3 full class periods before remote learning. But just wanted to give you a feel for where we've been before we find out how we get where we're going. Next lesson, we'll briefly introduce the origins of Islam. Then we're going to find out how we got out of this sort of pit of unreason that was at least the early Middle Ages. I know this doesn't feel like it's been short, but remember, we've covered 1,000 years. In covering 1,000 years in such a short time, obviously we've oversimplified. There's a lot of good and beautiful stuff in the Middle Ages too, that we just didn't have time to get into. You'll hear this period called the Dark Ages. That is fair for the first few centuries, not for the entire 1,000 years. We're going to find out soon how we got out of the worst of this. Thank you all for your time today, and I will talk to you next time.
Around a little bit, trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million missing pieces. When I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So sit back in your hole, or get back in your cave. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with me.